Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Channeling Erik YouTube channel. We've got our lovely co-host and the voice of my son, Michelle Gray. And we will make sure that you see on this screen a way to connect with her. And I've got my little boy, Erik. Hi, honey. How you doing?
Hi, Mama. Love you so much. I'm
Love
doing
you.
good.
Good, of course. Why not? All right, so we are going to talk about some human emotions. And I think this is probably, besides guilt and shame and things like that, probably one of the most difficult human emotions. Resentment, jealousy, envy, etc. So go ahead, Erik. I'll just give you the open mic. It's open mic night.
Yes, he likes that. He loves taking the mic. He
I
he
know.
says, he goes, Mom, um, like when you just said guilt and shame, he goes, that's all part of it. It's all part of it. He says, what's interesting, he says, shame actually brings jealousy forward because shame is often attached to feelings that we get from situations that have been in the past, and jealousy is something that arises in the present. And he says, you know, let's just first of all tell everybody jealousy, resentment, envy, all of those are emotions, and no emotion is lower than the other. He goes,
Oh,
now, we don't like to prefer, we don't like how they all feel. And he
yeah.
says, and that's why we get into, he says, these delicate dances around the emotions and why many get pushed away. He says, because we look at them as it doesn't feel good, it causes embarrassment, it causes shame, it
Mm.
brings up all these feelings within us. So he says, often we go to hide it, push it away, use coping strategies. But he says the thing is, their emotions, they need to be looked at, they need to be heard, they need to be loved, they need to be out front and in the center and treated equal. And when you do that, he says it gives you an opportunity to get to the root of it, gives you an opportunity to be able to bring it up to the surface. And he says, now, if you're a human being, you have experienced jealousy. He goes, all of us
Oh,
experience
yeah.
jealousy. We
Yeah.
all experience envy. We all experience these feelings that yes, resentment. We all experience these feelings that are uncomfortable. And he says, so first of all, he says, Mom, he goes, which what should we talk about with them? Well, let's talk about the differences. Let's talk about the differences between them. Is there a difference between envy and jealousy? And he says there is. There actually is. And he says that the difference is that envy, it's coming from a place of lack. He goes, actually, they're all coming from a place of lack. There is a sense of lack below the surface. Envy is when we are looking outside of ourselves, and it doesn't matter if we're looking at a person or a situation or an experience. It's looking outside of ourselves and seeing something that we feel we do not have, or we can't have, or we're not worth having. So he says envy is very similar to jealousy, but jealousy actually, like he said in the beginning, comes from a place of also lack, but it's more of a ownership. It's more of a this is mine and I don't want to share it. Or this person is mine, I don't want to share them. And so it comes more in a personal way, where envy has more to do with what we cannot have.
It's
So he
like the
says there's
illusion,
these
it
slight
all
differences.
all threads into the illusion of scarcity too.
Yes, yes. And he
Yeah.
goes, and what's underneath of all of that is fear. He says it all goes down
Yes.
to fear. So he says, what should we do if we are coping through these feelings? What should we do if we find that either ourselves, or he goes, we may be in relationship with somebody that is experiencing a high load of jealousy. And he
Yeah.
says, we know how it feels ourselves. And we also, many of us know how it feels to be on the receiving end of that. So he says, if you've got someone in your life that's experiencing a lot of jealousy, he says these can actually be really big boulders in relationships. They can be, he says, they can come fast and hard and be very destructive
Mm.
in relationships. And he said, so this is where it's really important to be able to get real honest with yourself and real honest with communication. He says, so if you've got somebody in your life that's experiencing a lot of jealousy, and he's going to use the example because a lot of people may understand this either with like in a relationship. So whether it is a friendship or a love relationship, that's the one that he's putting out front and center. And he goes, well, what
Yeah.
if you are on the receiving end? Somebody that you dearly love, that you love being with, but this jealousy keeps coming forward and it keeps coming into your everyday. It comes into every situation. He goes, this is something that needs to be addressed immediately because he says there's a little bit of a slippery slope that can happen where sometimes we almost can feel like jealousy creates wow, they care about me. Oh, they're
Oh
kind of
yeah.
jealous. That feels good because they want me. They don't want me to be with anyone else. And he says, and that gives a lot of mixed messages because when jealousy is present, there has been something behind the scenes to create that feeling because it's a sense of low self-esteem
Yeah.
inside. So whatever connected to that low self-esteem, and it could be many things that helped create that. So he says you have to first of all know you cannot fix that in somebody else. He says, so going on the mission to try and prove your goodness, to try and prove your look, I'm honest, look, and he's going to like infidelity in relationships
Oh
and all
yeah.
of those things. He says you could be trying to prove your goodness till the cows come home. And he says, and it's not going to work because that person has attached those feelings deeper inside to their own worth, their own self worth. So, being very honest as early as you can, if this comes up as a problem, he says you need to be very clear with the person that you're in a relationship with and let them know this is destructive.
Yeah.
This is something that we need to be out in the open about. And he says, don't be afraid to seek help. Don't be afraid to seek counseling. He says relationship counseling is one of the best things that any of us could do, no
Yes.
matter what position our relationship is. He goes, life is hard, guys. This shit is hard. And he says, in navigating relationships, well, he goes, why not connect with somebody to help you navigate that with you? Because many relationships are worth it. He goes, they're not. We can really repair and learn and grow together if we're able to have invite a third party in to help us see through some of these harder situations.
And what a great part of type of human experience for us. Yeah,
It
to
is.
unravel the emotions in a relationship. And usually the person that's jealous, it's because of their illusion of a scarcity of love. And
Yes.
somewhere in their this current life or another life, etc., they probably just did not feel loved enough to love themselves. So I think self-loathing is probably a keystone in some of these people who are so jealous with their friend or partner, etc.
Yes. And he says the other thing is too is he says deep down inside, he said when a person has experienced shame or they're really pushing down low self-esteem, when they get into a relationship and that relationship, like many in the very beginning, is very focused. So he says when a new relationship, friendship, people are getting to know each other, there's a lot of focus on each other. And then things start to, he says, balance out because we're still individuals. And he says, but what happens if that self esteem in the one partner is really low? They suddenly start to feel like parts of them are missing because they've only recognized themselves or seen themselves in a higher position because of the attention coming from the partner. So when that partner withdraws, even though it's a very natural thing to do as we grow through our relationships to not be so intensely focused on each other, when
Yeah.
that partner moves away, and it could be simply just to start a new job, or it could be they're starting to spend more time in another area of their
No.
lives, well, then that's where that jealousy really starts to amp up because
Yeah.
it's like something's wrong. It's like alert, alert, alert.
You're
Eric goes,
leaving me.
yeah,
Why? What's going on? You're getting
he
your
just
own
showed a
interest.
he showed a neon sign that says alert, alert, keep me
Yeah.
safe, keep me safe. And he
Yeah.
says, and that's really what it is because jealousy, like all emotions, are coming up like a signpost to say, hey, look over here. There's something going on over here. And when jealousy keeps coming up, and if you listening are one that's experiencing that, use that jealousy to go deeper.
Are you
Use
talking
that to
about
say,
using it if you're the jealous person?
yes,
I mean,
yes,
where's that coming from? So yeah, instead of hiding it and feeling shame over it, which is one difficult emotion, I won't say negative,
yeah,
over on top of another, then yeah, it's better to like, okay, I'm human. Everybody feels jealous. Why am I jealous? What is it in me that is, provoking these emotions?
mm-hmm,
And yeah, sometimes you have to really look throughout your past, your relationship with your siblings, there's all sorts of things to, the jungle to explore basically.
yes.
But that's part of the human experience, is that exploration, and so it's very important.
Yes. And he says that it's actually a very debilitating emotion if it starts to take over. He
Yeah.
says because it can also go hand in hand with mental illness as well. So he's actually saying like borderline personality
Oh,
disorder is
yeah.
one that is uh, very enhanced, that jealousy can go because there's a lot of low self-esteem
And there's been a
in
lot of
that.
abandonment in some cases of
Yes,
that create
yes,
the borderline personality disorder.
yes.
Yeah.
So he says
Abandonment. Yeah.
it's quite debilitating, and he says that's why seeking counseling, having somebody, whatever that looks like for you, having that party to speak to about what's going on to help you navigate that is extremely important, because he says there can be a real distorted way of seeing the world. And he goes, and that's the biggest message, is that jealousy that you feel is real, but understand that things are feeling far more inflated or dangerous around you, or threat to your relationship. It's not really that way. He says most times it's so inflated that you feel
Yeah.
like everything is falling apart, and it's truly not that way. But he says the consistency with that energy will drive things apart.
So how often is abandonment in the past, even if it's another life? How how often is that a part of creating the tendency to be jealous?
He says it's always involved in one way or another.
Oh,
So he
okay.
says it's on a scale, because we all experience things differently. So we may have a little bit of it, or we may have a lot of it, but abandonment plays into it in one way or another, whether you were physically abandoned, emotionally abandoned, all of the above. He
Yeah.
says it, and it also goes hand in hand with rejection as well, abandonment and rejection.
Yeah. It's so weird because my father fits that perfectly. When he was a kid, that his parents left him at a boarding school because it was difficult. And they said, just stay right here. We'll be back in 10 minutes. And they didn't come back for months. He had to stay in the boarding school, and he was a real puny little guy.
Yeah.
And but he had always been proudest of me. I was the one that achieved the most of all my siblings. And because I'm just that way. But then he just got to be jealous. It's really
Mm-hmm.
strange. Well, you had 5 kids because I only had 4 kids. Well, you got this big of a boat because I just had a ski boat. It's like the weirdest thing. I mean, I want my kids to do a lot better than me by far.
Because
So,
Erik says, Mom, he says he saw himself in you and would watch your achievements, and it would make him feel good, because he didn't see you as an individual. He would see you as an extension of himself. And
oh,
he says, so as you would grow and achieve, it started to hurt his self-esteem.
so basically, he early on took credit for my successes because I made that. So
Yes.
it's all
Yes.
me.
Yes.
Interesting. Hey, let's see if we
Yes.
can get something from him. Jose Antonio. What do you feel about that now? Let's interview somebody who had the severe tendency to be jealous of others and see how he feels about that from the other side.
Uh, he's just saying right now that he was very envious of you. And the truth of and this was not something he understood in the physical,
No.
but he says the truth of it is you experienced more love in your life and he could not receive it or give it.
Yeah.
And that was the truth of what made him envious.
Oh,
So, because it was easier for him to attach to material,
yeah.
that was where his comfort was, to
True.
see his goodness in material, to compare goodness with others with material, that was where he would express that. But what he was never able to do was express that he was never able to be the parent that you are.
Yeah.
And he
That's
watched that,
hard.
and he
Well,
watched the relationship with the children, with you. And
oh,
he says that was something that uh he's showing, like wiping it out, wiping it out, wiping it out, like not even willing to make excuses for that, just knowing that that was something in him that he just was never able to connect to.
wow. So, is there any advice you have to people who are jealous of others that now that you can are in a position where you can help others?
And he says thank you, and thank you for asking him. Yes, he does have advice, and that advice is to speak about it, to talk about it, and to be vulnerable. He
Mm,
says access your vulnerability within yourself, because we all have vulnerable spaces, and
sure.
vulnerability is where there is power, because when you can express your vulnerability, you then can take the pathway into raising yourself up, because you no longer are in a space of comparison. You become then in a space of acceptance of who you are, and you
Oh,
look for ways to then elevate yourself. He says that is the way through. When you stand in the ego, and he says the part of the ego that says, nope, I'm not going to let you go there. I'm too proud. I've got too much pride. I'm too good at this. I'm not going to go there. He says vulnerability will knock all of that down. Vulnerability helps people connect. And he says if he were able to access his own vulnerability, he may have had a pathway, even if he was not completely successful with it, but a pathway in being able to accept love and even give love, which is
yeah,
something that he was not able to do.
for you. So, what about any advice to a person who is um, subjected to another person's jealousy? Like I was subjected to your jealousy. Any advice from the other side?
Well, he says the discomfort of feeling that jealousy is very confusing for another, especially when he says, in your case, Elisa, your intent was never to compete with me.
Yeah.
Your purpose of growth was to better your life and that of your children, and was never about trying to trigger me. So, anyone that is experiencing this same thing, it's my advice to you to first of all understand that he uses his hands quite a bit. To
Yeah.
first of all understand that uh, it is not about you. Jealousy is not about what you have done. You are not responsible for the emotions that are coming from another individual. If there is something that has been caused, and he says, if there is a situation, you will know. You will know. And he says, look at, am I confused with this, or do I know exactly why this person is jealous? And
Mm,
that answer will tell you right away whether it's about you or whether it's about someone else. And he says that he recommends using compassion towards the like not judging that other
yeah.
person, but then also understanding what is best for you. What is best for you in this relationship? What is best for you in this communication? Maybe this communication needs to be minimized. But he says, again, this is about communication. It's about communication with yourself, communication with your divine self, and communication with all those that you're in relationship with. And if, again, that other person is experiencing so much jealousy that it starts to he says, affect your own being, then it's time to take a pass on that relationship.
Yeah. So what do you think about Poppy, Eric? You did well.
He says
Bravo.
he says Poppy's come a long way in his
Oh,
learning.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you said, Eric, that there's not much you can do, and thank you, Dad, to help a person who's jealous. But what about love? Love heals all. Is there a way that you can show them that they're worthy of love and give them love?
Yes, Erik says, yes, of course, because mom, he says, you may not be able to convince somebody else, but we all feel. And when you're able to express love without condition, so examples are, if someone's experiencing a lot of jealousy, something not to do would be to say, listen, come over here and be close to me, and to give attention and give love, but say only if you don't complain about this. He says, don't
Oh,
give
yeah.
ultimatums. Don't give them, because they're giving themselves ultimatums all the time in their own mind
Yeah.
when it comes to guilt and shame, because they are not enjoying that behavior
Yeah.
just as much as you are not enjoying receiving it. So he says, love really is the way through everything. And that love is to say, listen, and what he's showing me is an argument that's happening. And so there's the other person in the relationship is giving a lot of, you did this, you did this, you did this, and this is how it makes me feel. Erik says, stop that conversation by saying, I love you. And what we're going to do, let's take a break until things have calmed down where we can talk about it. And he says, and follow through. When you've got a partnership with somebody and there's a lot of jealousy, it's very important that you follow what you intend to do and you follow through. So, follow through and commitment with the person that is jealous to show them that there's not condition to your love for them.
Wow. That is pretty amazing. I lost my train of thought, but it was something kind of important. Well, it'll come back to me. But
Yeah.
okay, what about jealousy and envy and all that having an effect on the collective and actually changing history? Can you talk about that?
That's a good one, he says. That is a good one because, of course, he says, as it exists in every human, he says, of course, it exists in the collective.
Mm.
And so he says, remember, everything really does start within us. So by looking at this within ourselves and being able to move through our emotions with more ease is the practice of really looking at those emotions and understanding them. When it comes to the collective, he says, well, really, we see it on a grand stage all the time. He says, how many times have you said or heard that even watching on the political stage, or he says the internet shows us the inside conversations that are happening in people's lives that years ago we never would have seen. And
Yeah,
so he says, don't get involved in that, meaning don't rev up the motor
yeah.
of that energy. And he keeps showing me Washington. That's how he shows me politics. He
Oh,
shows me the White House. And so what he's saying is the conversation of kids in the playground, like kids in the playground, because he says that a
yeah,
lot of personal jealousies or personal envies end up playing themselves out
yeah.
in bigger stages. So he said that's something that we are moving through collectively, but he says we're still very much in the root chakra as a collective with a
Mm,
lot of these emotions.
yeah.
So, but he says it is moving because he says look for it. There are many movements that and he says even companies that are have a direction of not playing games, like very clear, very heart based. And he says we're going to
Good.
see more of these companies that are leading with a different kind of integrity that we'll see more and more in our collective.
Okay, well, I've heard from people that this rise in anti-Semitism is based on jealousy, like the Jews or the bankers, and they got more money and all that kind of stuff. Is there any truth to, I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Well, it is, but he says yes, that's true. There is that is very present, and he also says, but it goes back to history. It goes right back to the lack, and it goes back to that history
Yeah.
of the pain that was caused.
Yeah.
when many groups would go without, and the suffering. So a lot of that comes up now is like, well, you shouldn't have that because of what your ancestors did, or
Yeah.
you shouldn't. So he says, again, it's taking those energies that, the shame, the guilt, the anger, the resentment that are connected to the past. The jealousy is what comes out in the present. So the jealousy needs to be addressed. And he says one of the um, ways that humanity can help come together is by looking at where are we today and no longer connecting to what's happened in the past. He says we can
Yeah.
have respect for what's happened in the past. We can have honor, sadness even, but not be in it,
Yeah.
not live in it. He says addressing the collective in the same way that we'd address our own healing journey personally. And he says, once we get to a stage where we're able to do that, that will be a part in our collective where we're able to see ourselves more as one and not as separate.
One day, probably not in my lifetime, but we'll get there.
He says
Oh,
it'll come.
it'll come. Anything else you want to talk about before we close on this subject?
The only thing he's saying is he's just touching on resentment a little bit. And he
Oh, yeah.
says, resentment is the piece of jealousy and envy that is a situation that may have happened in the past. And he says it really comes from blame. And again, it's seeing everything as outside of yourself. So he says if you're holding on to resentment and pain of something that's happened because maybe you feel misunderstood, maybe you don't see a situation went as the way you feel it did, another party or another situation, they saw it differently. So he says you have to be willing to look at your own resentment and also understand that holding on to resentment is actually damaging
It is.
your body, damaging your energy. It's not doing anything to the other people or situations. He says they go along and do their own thing. So why? He says, ask yourself, why would I live in this resentment?
Yeah.
Why would I? And he says, how do I get through that? Well, everything that we talked about today, where did that resentment come from?
Yeah.
Where is it really connected? And he says, and doing a little bit of self investigation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, and resentment is something like everything else that will peel off in layers.
Yeah. And the remedy is forgiveness. And the forgiveness is for the person that needs to forget. I mean, in my own example, my sister, younger sister, convinced my dad to give her all his millions and none to my sister Terry and I. And I held a lot of resentment in my heart for that
Mm-hmm.
because I was the only one that helped my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
there, beck and call. So, you can tell, probably tell there's a little irritation there. But yeah, so that has been a big learning thing with me. And Laura and I have had a lot of past lives that dealt with betrayal. My
Yeah.
my father and her betraying me in Atlantis and a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of stuff. It can be much more complicated than what this current life holds.
That's right. And Erik says that's why awareness is so powerful, why having information and awareness. So even having those pieces of the past life to understand the foundation of why these energies became present in this life.
Yeah.
And so when you have that power, and he goes, and everyone that's listening to this has a great deal of awareness and a big opportunity, because if you're listening to this and you hear this, he says you have the opportunity to go in, do a little self-discovery and work through it. And he says, and acceptance is a big part of it, because we may not be able to change the events that have happened or the choices that other people made, but we can change how we relate to it. And if we're willing to put in the work to do that, we will free ourselves. And he says, and I'll tell you, Mom, he says, a real ticket to a whole lot of abundance and a raised vibration is forgiveness.
Yeah. That's right. One of the hardest things to do, that and
Yes.
surrendering, and they're kind of the
Yes.
same, really.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
forgiveness is surrendering to love, I guess. Not sure. Or
It's
surrendering resentment.
Erik says forgiveness is really surrendering to the control,
Oh,
surrendering, it's letting go of holding control over this emotion or holding strings over this person, because he says you're really when you are holding something over somebody else. Again, it's really, you're doing it to yourself. But he says why forgiveness can be so difficult is because when we feel like we are holding blame or holding back our forgiveness from someone or something, we feel like we're doing something. It's like giving ourselves justice. It's
Yeah.
like, I am not going to like my neighbor because they cut my hedge, and damn it, I liked that hedge. And he says, so really, when you allow yourself to say, well, you know what, it's a hedge. If I want another one, I'll plant another one.
Right.
But he says, and that is, again, like, we may never get justice from somebody else, or we may never get I'm sorry from a situation, but we can give it to ourselves if we're willing to do that.
So much wisdom from you, Erik, and from you, Dad. Thank you so, so much. You guys check her out.
Check
We
that
will
out.
make sure you get the information about Michelle. One thing I will say is I finally got the courage to start looking at my iMemories, all the old videos from the past, from very early on, before I even had kids, and all the way up to current.
Wow.
And I just really, it struck me how much I loved my kids. I mean,
Yeah.
the love from
Yes.
me to them was more than I remembered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Erik just wants to say, Mom, he says, that truly is your purpose, is about love
Yeah.
and your family. And he says, and what you've done is you've adopted an entire world
Yeah. They're all my
as your
babies.
children.
You guys are
Yeah.
all my babies.
And we all feel it. We all feel it.
Okay, well, thank you. And y'all subscribe, hit the notification bell. See ya. Gotta go run and get a
Bye.
tissue. Bye.
Love ya.
Love
Bye.
you.